Welcome to today's explainer. Look, if you're a senior executive, you already know exactly how incredibly frustrating this dynamic can be. I mean, your organization invests massive amounts of time, energy, and capital into designing the absolute perfect strategy and operating model. You've got it all mapped out. Yet, when it comes time for execution, the results just inexplicably fall short. Well, today we're breaking down exactly why that gap exists based on our source material, Sustaining Performance, Mindsets and Behaviors Determine Execution. To help bridge that gap between your strategic design and day-to-day reality, here's our agenda. We'll cover 1. The strategy execution gap. 2. The silent strategy killer. 3. Why process is not enough. 4. Targeting few critical behaviors. And 5. Translating intent into action. Let's get right to it. Starting off with Section 1, the strategy execution gap, where heavy investments stall. Okay, let's dive into this. As senior leaders, you know the execution gap is rarely due to a lack of planning. So where does the disconnect actually happen? Well, think of it like this side-by-side comparison. Strategy and structure on the left, they are absolutely vital because they set your company's direction. It's the map. But direction alone doesn't actually drive the car, right? According to our source material, it's the right side, mindsets and behaviors, that ultimately determines whether your strategy is executed with discipline or if it just gets completely diluted in practice. Execution is determined by how people think and act day to day, period. That brings us right into Section 2, the silent strategy killer, the case of the missing strategy. To really ground this abstract concept, let's look at a classic generic mandate that executive teams communicate all the time. We must put customers first. I'm sure you've championed customer-centric strategy just like this at some point. The communication is loud, it's clear, it's frequent, and honestly, it usually ends up printed on a poster in the break room. And boy, does this brilliantly illustrate the gap, because behind closed doors, a totally contradictory internal reality takes over, doesn't it? Meetings continue to prioritize internal targets over customer outcomes. Functions optimize solely for their own siloed metrics, and decisions are driven by internal convenience rather than the actual impact on the customer. When this happens, over time, your employees learn a really dangerous lesson. They learn that customer centricity is just a PR message, not a requirement. The stated strategy is perfectly intact on paper, sure, but the actual behavior, it hasn't changed one bit. So what's actually causing this? Well, the root cause comes down to mindsets. This is defined as the underlying beliefs and assumptions that guide how your people interpret situations and make decisions. Think of mindsets as the invisible operating system running in the background. They are incredibly powerful because they dictate what your people actually pay attention to, what they prioritize, and crucially, how they respond when the pressure is on. And following right on the heels of that is behavior. Behavior is simply the visible expression of those underlying mindsets in daily work. It's what we actually see. When mindsets are aligned with your strategy, behaviors just follow naturally. Your teams are going to make decisions that support your strategic intent without needing constant top-down handholding. Execution gets way faster. But when mindsets are misaligned, those visible behaviors diverge completely from the strategy.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, why process is not enough, the limits of compliance.
You know, when things go wrong, the default reflex for most executives is to just build a brand new process, add another checklist. But I really want to pause and ask you directly, why is focusing on process alone completely insufficient to fix an execution gap? Here's the hard truth. Processes can guide actions, absolutely, but they literally cannot override deeply held beliefs. If your people secretly believe that avoiding risk is safer than pursuing growth, they're just going to find creative ways to comply with your new process while still avoiding risk. If they believe internal metrics matter more than customer outcomes, their behaviors will reflect that belief, no matter what shiny new workflow you put in place. They will comply with the mechanics of the process, sure, but the entire spirit of your strategy will be totally lost. Let's move over to Section 4, targeting few critical behaviors, the surgical fix. So the crucial point here is this. Leaders so often try to address misaligned mindsets through massive, broad cultural messaging campaigns. But effective culture shaping, it requires extreme specificity. Trying to boil the ocean and change everything all at once simply does not work. Instead, high-performing organizations focus on a very small set of critical behaviors that actually move the needle for strategy execution. These have to be clearly defined, consistently reinforced, and visibly role modeled.
So, what does a targeted behavior actually look like in the real world? Well, instead of promoting customer focus as some vague, lofty value, you define specific actions. Things like involve customers early in decision making, prioritize customer impact when making trade offs, close feedback loops quickly. See the difference? These aren't abstract concepts, they are specific, observable, daily actions that translate your strategic intent into reality.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, translating intent into action, sustaining the change. Let's see how this all builds together. Sustaining this performance requires deliberate attention across 3 steps. Step 1, you as leaders must make explicit exactly what behaviors need to change. Step 2, you have to align your organizational signals, decisions, and reinforcement mechanisms to support those specific changes. And step 3, and honestly, this is where the magic happens, over time, repeated behaviors reshape mindsets. New ways of working become embedded only after sustained behavioral reinforcement. You act your way into a new way of thinking.
If you take only one thing away from this explainer back to your executive team, let it be this core thesis right here. Execution improves not when strategy is just communicated more clearly or more loudly, but when mindsets and behaviors are actually aligned with what the strategy requires. Alignment is the true engine of execution. It's the whole shebang.
I want to leave you with one final provocative question directly from our source material. Really reflect on this. Are your leaders visibly role modeling the strategy? Because as the source points out, leadership role modeling is hands down the most powerful lever you have for shaping culture and driving execution. Just think about that as you look at your own day-to-day actions. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and we will see you next time